Recent headline news in Israel is that Russia has acknowledged that their air defense systems were used to shoot down Israeli missiles that we shot against Iranian assets in Syria. Understand, this means that Russia gave permission for their air defense system to be used against Israel. This is a huge, huge development and very dangerous for Israel. This would be the first time in years that Russia has given permission to shoot at Israeli planes or missiles. Let's break this down. Folks, as you know, social media censorship is growing. The best way to support our video work for Israel is to subscribe to our video newsletter on pulseofisrael.com and to share our videos. If you are already a subscriber, then thank you. As I have said since the beginning of our new government in Israel, while this new government is led by a right-wing prime minister together with another right-wing party, while they might do some good things in government, overall it is a very, very dangerous government. Not just because it includes anti-Israel Knesset members as part of the Meretz party and the Muslim Brotherhood Ram party, in a sense allowing the left and extreme left and anti-Israel left to make decisions for Israel, but the geopolitical mistakes you are about to learn about made by this government in just the first few weeks are extremely worrying. And this government just got started. So let's take a step back to understand the implications of the Russian air defense system shooting down Israeli missiles over Syria, and why this is a huge security danger to Israel. First of all, Israel has been firing at Iranian troops and armaments in Syria for years. Iran has used Syria to bring troops and arms closer in order to hit Israel, right? Syria is on Israel's northern border. In addition, Iran has used Syria as a land bridge to bring arms to Hezbollah and Lebanon, also on Israel's northern border. Israel has been doing everything in its power with airstrikes to stop Iran in Syria from accomplishing those two goals. Russia has the most advanced air defense systems in Syria, yet they have not been used to shoot at Israeli planes or missiles because Netanyahu and Putin had a deal. Basically, thanks to the Netanyahu-Putin deal, Russia, the protector of Syria, has allowed Israel to stop Iran in Syrian territory. Well, it seems that with Netanyahu now gone as Israeli prime minister, Putin is stopping that deal, and he has given a free rein to shoot at Israeli planes or missiles over Syria with Russian air defense systems. Will current Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett be able to make that same deal with Putin? Probably not. Why? Well, in this same article, it reports the following, quote, "Earlier Saturday, Asharik al-Awsat cited an unnamed Russian source as saying that following talks with Washington, Moscow had got the impression that Washington does not welcome the continuous Israeli raids and thus believes it, Russia, has the freedom to act more aggressively to thwart them. In light of this, the Russians were now supplying Syrian forces with more advanced anti-missile systems and know-how, making them more capable of shooting down Israeli armaments," the report said. It claimed the effect of this was already being seen with Syrian air defenses shooting down 7 of 8 Israeli missiles during a July 19th Israeli raid. End quote from that article. I hope you understand the magnitude of that report as I do. Basically, Russia is taking the lead to allow for shooting at Israel from the Biden administration. It is the Biden administration that wants to stop Israel from firing at Iranian targets in Syria. So Russia and Syria now have the blessing of the United States government to have a free hand in shooting to stop Israel from attacking Iranian assets in Syria. Does that mean that Russia will only shoot at Israeli missiles or at Israeli aircraft flying over Syria to attack Iranian targets? We don't know. But I'm sure that Israel's defense establishment and IDF high command are extremely worried about this very dangerous development. Now, if former Prime Minister Netanyahu would have been Prime Minister, he would be standing up to the Biden administration and President Biden and not allowing them to let Russian air defense missiles be shot to stop Israel. But Prime Minister Bennett, would he do that? Well, it's very doubtful whether he can turn this around for the following reasons. Well, first of all, Prime Minister Bennett does not have the diplomatic experience as Netanyahu on the world stage. He also does not have the personal relationships with either Biden or Putin to use in trying to change their minds on this issue. But most importantly, Bennett is not really in charge of Israeli foreign policy. Foreign Minister Yair Lapid is in charge of Israel's foreign policy right now. And Lapid has no understanding of geopolitics or on how to stand up for Israel's interests on the global stage. Besides not understanding geopolitics, Lapid's ideology is based on placating the world powers, the United Nations and the European Union, that always pressure Israel. Under Lapid's foreign policy leadership, Israel is now left in a very vulnerable and compromising situation. How do we know this? Well, let's move on to the next horrendous foreign policy mistakes of this new government. Mistake number 1. Foreign Minister Yair Lapid created a diplomatic crisis with Poland, one of Israel's key allies in the United Nations and European Union that consistently vote with Israel, as opposed to Germany, France, Britain, etc., other Western European countries that sometimes vote against Israel even though they are our friends. This is something that Netanyahu understood about geopolitics, that there are no friends, only interests. Netanyahu saw that many Eastern European countries had similar interests as Israel, especially regarding their desire to protect their national identities and not be overrun by illegal Muslim immigrants like the European Union wanted all EU countries to do. So over the years, Netanyahu has developed warm relations with Eastern European countries because of their shared interests, and they consistently save Israel from anti-Israel votes at the United Nations and European Union that are many times supported by our Western European friends like Germany and France and Britain. And just listen to the report about Lapid's recent visit in Brussels with European Union leaders. Quote, in his address to his EU counterparts, Lapid backed a two-state solution with the Palestinians and noted Europe's and Israel's shared democratic values, seeking to open a new chapter with the bloc, European Union, after over a decade of strained ties. Why strained ties? Because Eastern European countries were helping Israel. The comments appeared designed to mark a break with Israel's previous administration, which under then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had aligned itself closely with the Central Eastern European bloc within the EU, an area dubbed New Europe by Donald Rumsfeld, led by countries ruled by strongmen and right-wing populists, and which opposed some of Brussels' more liberal policies. That's exactly it. It is extremely clear that Foreign Minister Lapid is now undoing all the critical diplomatic work Netanyahu worked on for the past decade in protecting Israel with an Eastern European bloc at the European Union and United Nations. By Lapid creating a diplomatic crisis with Poland, as well as downgrading the importance of good relations with Israel's Eastern European allies, also like Hungary, Lapid is leading Israel to have no friends to rely upon in the United Nations or the European Union unless Israel capitulates to the pressures of the Western European friends. Now, many people do not know, but Eastern European countries have stopped many anti-Israel votes at the European Union as well as the United Nations. Because in the European Union, every vote there must be unanimous. Without the votes of our Eastern European allies for their anti-Israel votes, well, we can expect many anti-Israel resolutions to pass at both the European Union and the United Nations. This is a huge danger for Israel. This situation is created by Foreign Minister Lapid, or actual acting Prime Minister Lapid, who believes that we must cozy up with the Western European countries because of their progressivism, who always pressure Israel and don't always vote with us at the UN. And instead, he wants to shun our Eastern European allies who never pressure Israel, yet vote against anti-Israel votes at the UN. This is a huge strategic geopolitical mistake for Israel by this government run by Bennett and Lapid. Let's get something straight. Many people had a problem with the strong relationship Netanyahu developed with the Eastern European countries because of their history of Jew hatred. Yes, there was a lot of Jew hatred in these Eastern European countries, but honestly, it is quite hypocritical since even France, Germany, and other Western European countries also have the same history of Jew hatred as well. Germany, everyone? The bottom line is it's not about the history of Jew hatred. These leftist ideologues like Lapid and his cohorts believe that the cultured, progressive Western European countries are the good guys, our allies, while the nationalistic Eastern European countries are the bad guys and shouldn't be considered allies. But that is a total misunderstanding of reality with horrendous implications for Israel from a foreign policy perspective. As for another recent foreign policy mistake by Foreign Minister Lapid, he just appointed a close friend as ambassador to the United Arab Emirates, a man who was against Trump's Abraham Accords between Sunni Muslim countries and Israel, and who publicly belittled the peaceful normalization agreement between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. In this tweet, Lapid's choice for ambassador to the UAE wrote the following. He shows his utter ignorance and misunderstanding on the importance of this deal made between Israel and the UAE, the country he is about to be ambassador in. So let's set the record straight for everyone to understand. Egypt has a cold peace with Israel. Israel was forced to give away a lot of land for that peace agreement with Egypt, more than half of what Israel is today in the landmass. And yet Egyptians hate Israel, Egyptians hardly do business with Israel, and Egyptians don't want to visit Israel. It is an agreement between two governments, and that's it. That is not a recipe for long-standing peace. Jordan is the same thing. Jordan also has a cold peace with Israel. Israel agreed to give away a lot of precious water to Jordan. Israel even had to give over land to Jordan as well. And yet, Jordanians hate Israel. They hardly do business with Israel, and they don't want to visit Israel. Again, another cold peace between governments. Not real peace. Yet, in the Abraham Accords, for the first time, Israel was not pressured to give away anything for the normalization deal with the United Arab Emirates. The UAE wanted Israel's business, technology, and medical know-how to help their country grow and develop. The business opportunities between our two countries are vast. UAE people are excited to visit Israel, and this deal opens up a huge window of opportunity for a true long-term normalization between the Jewish state of Israel and the countries in the Muslim world interested in benefiting by having peaceful, normal relations with Israel. This deal has a real opportunity to develop a peaceful future between Jews and Muslims in the Middle East. That is a potential true peace with a true hope for a better future for us all, not like the deals made with Egypt and Jordan. Yet Lapid's pick for ambassador to the United Arab Emirates has a total misunderstanding of our reality and existence in the Middle East. And he will be ambassador to the UAE? That's just another car wreck waiting to happen instead of capitalizing on so many opportunities. The bottom line is that the left loves the unpeaceful agreements with Egypt and Jordan, where Israel was forced to give away our own land and resources, while they hate the true peace agreements with the UAE and such, which are a true opportunity for a better future for Jews and Muslims in the Middle East. That's the left that preaches about peace. Go figure. To sum it all up, Israel is in an extremely precarious situation with this new government. It seems that even if Prime Minister Naftali Bennett would want to be more Netanyahu-like with regards to Israeli foreign policy, he can't, because his hands are tied behind his back since he gave over Israel's foreign policy to Foreign Minister and Acting Prime Minister Yair Lapid. With this all, do not despair. We will overcome the mistakes and damage of this government. How and when? That I don't know. But we will. In the meantime, keep on praying for Israel and stay tuned to my Pulse of Israel updates and analysis to hear everything that the establishment media is not telling you. Remember, with it all, we are so blessed to be back as sovereign in our eternal and ancestral homeland with our own army to defend ourselves. For 2,000 years, we were wandering refugee Jews all over the world, persecution after persecution, country after exile. Every once in a while, we might get a bad government here in Israel that makes dangerous mistakes. I will still take that over being a wandering people without a homeland or an army to protect ourselves. As I always say, perspective is everything. Signing off from the beautiful, eternal, and ancestral homeland of the Jewish people, the Judean hills of Israel.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.